what I find is the best way to really stand out and create, again, just an audience of people who really like tuning in, really like following, really like buying because they like following, is to develop the attractive character, which is really you just creating your own character, just like a superhero is created with your origin story and what you stand for and what you stand against, and your moral code, your own unique moral code, your own version of kryptonite with your character flaws, and so on and so forth. That really just makes your audience be able to identify with you, makes your audience feel like you can empathize with them, creates relatability to you as an actual person. And so when you're sending the emails, when you're sending the videos, when you're hosting the podcast episodes and so on and so forth, people tune in because they know the person behind the actual message, which is a complete and total game changer for me when I worked into my marketing.
All right, I'm here with Misha Wilson. Misha, you really came out of the gate super strong as an affiliate for Elite Marketing Pro, crushed it like from day one. And you'll have to remind me on the timeline, but a couple years ago, started doing your own thing and just really took things, not just to like the next level, but really just like almost exponentially took things like up into the stratosphere. So congrats, my man. It's been awesome to see you just like progress and grow over the years. It's been a really inspiring journey.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I couldn't have done it without everyone at Elite Marketing Pro, and some of my oldest, best kind of like the good old days memories are hopping on those What's Working Now webinars, or not what was the weekly hangout with you and Nick?
Oh, we did
Monday Mojo.
We did the Mojo. Yeah, is that what
I love
we call
those
it?
things.
Yeah.
That was like my Monday at 3 o'clock. But yeah, man, it's been fun. Elite Marketing Pro as an affiliate taught me, so many different skill sets that I could then use to create my own products, create my own business. Created my own system, and yeah, like you said, I've just kind of been rocking and rolling, building out the business, getting people in roles and hiring a team and doing all that stuff, hosting events. Did our first event a couple of months ago, our first bigger event, and it's been a ride for sure. It's been a lot of fun, man.
One of the things that, of course, you've noticed, and I think, of course, everyone will notice along the way is, man, the skills that got you from point A to point B are so different from the skills from point B to point C. And it's just a continual process of growth and pushing that comfort zone and accomplishing bigger and better things. And you sort of done an amazing job of that over the past couple years.
Thank you. Yeah, it's one of those, what got you here won't get you there, and lots of times who got you here won't get you there too. So you kind of got to be finding skill, learning new skill sets, and it's fun though. It's part of the journey and it's a challenge, so it's good.
Totally.
But, yeah.
So you spoke on creating a following, a cult-like following, by first, of course, establishing the attractive character, which is something that I'm really excited to talk about. So give us a little, what is that? What is an attractive character?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's really, if you look at all the popular TV shows, all the superheroes that you follow when you're growing up, all the different personas that we tune into when it comes to personalities, it's really that the personality and the character is oftentimes what gets you to tune in and follow that person versus the content that they're delivering or the message sometimes, right? The message is obviously part of what has to do with the actual character itself. But what I find happens to a lot of marketers is they get involved, and it's kind of one of these things where they're taught to, learn to teach, produce content, go out and learn something and then immediately teach it, which is awesome. I always, I tell people to do that as well, and it's something that people should always be doing. It positions you in the marketplace correctly. It positions you as the authority, all of those things. But oftentimes content can be really boring if you don't have a personality behind that content. If you look at averages, the average American reads about 1 book per year, and they watch about 4 to 6 hours of TV per day, right? Yeah. Which really goes to show that people are more after entertainment. People are more after, just being able to escape for 15, 20 minutes from their daily routine, because a lot of people aren't necessarily living the life, of their dreams, unfortunately, which is what you guys do so awesome, helping them to do that. But and kind of positioning your message always as more education, more how to set up a blog post, how to create a YouTube video, how to create a pay-per-click ad. You can kind of blend into the noise of the marketplace. And what I find is the best way to really stand out and create, again, just an audience of people who really like tuning in, really like following, really like buying because they like following, is to develop the attractive character, which is really you just creating your own character, just like a superhero is created with your origin story and what you stand for and what you stand against, and your moral code, your own unique moral code, your own version of kryptonite with your character flaws, and so on and so forth. That really just makes your audience be able to identify with you, makes your audience feel like you can empathize with them, creates relatability to you as an actual person. And so when you're sending the emails, when you're sending the videos, when you're hosting the podcast episodes and so on and so forth, people tune in because they know the person behind the actual message, which is a complete and total game changer for me when I worked into my marketing. And it's something that a lot of people are completely and totally unaware of, at least people I've worked with. So
definitely. And I think a real key there is, you mentioned there's a lot of how-to content out there.
Yeah.
I mean, let's just be frank. I mean,
there's
just pretty much any kind, like anything you want to know, right? Just Google it or go to YouTube. I mean, there's content.
Yeah.
But of course, what there's not is these distinct, unique personalities in a lot of cases that are, delivering that content. So I think that's a really key piece of the equation that a lot of people really need to spend some time considering. And I know you mentioned that there were sort of 4 main archetypes or personalities that one, may choose to model themselves after. It'd be great to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, and it kind of depends on where you're at in your journey. What I usually recommend, which archetype to go ahead and take. There's the leader. That's kind of what I tend to position myself as. There's the adventurer or the crusader. There's the reporter or the evangelist. And then there's the reluctant hero. So the leader is the person who's on a mission, who's going on a mission, who's accomplishing a mission, and is leading their audience on that path. Now what's really cool is that a brand new person in the online world can immediately step into the leadership role and position themselves as a leader. There's nothing stopping them from doing that, but it can kind of be a little bit intimidating for a lot of people when they're first getting started. But that's the leader. You have the adventurer or the crusader. That's the person who goes to the masterminds, goes to the events, goes to all the different mentorship programs, goes on crazy fun vacations, goes on the big yachts and all that stuff, and really just documents the process and documents the experience more than anything, and then brings it back to their audience, which is of course a form of value, so their audience can follow that person. The reporter, the evangelist, is usually the route that I tell someone who's brand new in the marketplace to go, because really what the reporter or the evangelist is the person who's super passionate, super fired up, super into what they're doing, but they don't know what they're doing quite yet. They love it, but they don't know what they're doing quite yet. And really what it entails is you going out and interviewing awesome leaders like Andrew, interviewing the guys at Elite Marketing Pro, interviewing the people who you're following, and based on their knowledge, based on the value that they can bring, really again bringing your audience that value, bringing the marketplace that value through interviews, through again bringing third-party value to the equation. So that's the reporter, the evangelist. Again, it's an awesome place to start because you don't need any social proof, you don't need any results, you don't need a name, you don't need a following. There's nothing stopping you from going out, finding someone, interviewing them. And it also allows you to leverage association, because if you're on an interview with, let's say, $1 million earner, and you're on video with that person, people are going to associate you with that person. And so it allows you to build your own perceived authority in the marketplace without necessarily having a huge level of result yet. And last, which is maybe the most powerful actually, is the reluctant hero. And the reluctant hero is the archetype that doesn't necessarily want to be out there in the spotlight, doesn't necessarily want to be front and center. They know that they're just, an average Joe. They know that there's nothing special about them necessarily, but they know that the value that they have, they know that the mission that they're on, they know that the lives that they can change, it's all worth them putting themselves out there. It's all worth them, stepping out into the spotlight and helping people and really kind of stepping into that leadership role. And again, building the business that allows them to affect change the way they're looking to go ahead and do so. Again, reluctant in putting themselves out there as the hero, but still the reluctant hero. And so those are kind of the 4 archetypes that are most common. I usually recommend people start with the reporter, the evangelist. The leader is usually the next role that people step into. If you're really outgoing, you want to be in front of the camera, you want to document everything, you can really play the adventurer, the crusader really well. And then once you have a little bit of a higher level of result, the reluctant hero is extremely powerful and it's extremely attractive to people. So
that's great, man. I wonder if you could speak for a minute actually about the origin story a little bit, because of course one thing that I've found amusing is I don't even know how many times they've like rebooted Spider-Man over the past decade or something, but of course every time they always reset back to that origin story. And of course, when you see the speakers on the stage, what are they telling you but their origin story? And that's just such a huge, well, it's something that people really need to start thinking about if they haven't already. I mean, that's critical.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at it like we talked about a minute ago, if you look at any superhero, if you look at, you know, any of the big marketers that you're following, if you look at any character on a TV show that you love watching, there's always their story woven into the mix. There's always, usually at the very beginning, you get a sense for who that character is and what their original origin story is. And really at a core level, it allows you to create identification with your audience, and it allows you to really kind of be more relatable to your audience because they understand who you are as a person. They understand where you've come from. They understand struggles that you've dealt with. They understand pains that you've had, frustrations you've had. You know, being evicted, my own story. I talk about getting in debt. I talk about, you know, all the different stuff I dealt with, frustrations tech-wise in my business, right? And all of those pains, all of those struggles are things that my audience can identify with. And so it makes me more relatable versus being either someone who they don't necessarily follow because I just blend into everything else, or being kind of the person who they might follow but they can't identify with at all because you're too perfect, because there is no relatability, and because they can't really get a sense of who you are as an actual person. So working in your story, really getting clear on, you know, the pains that your audience is feeling. You're probably feeling those same pains as well if you're first getting started in your business, right? And a lot of people hate that fact that they're feeling those pains, but once you get through it, it's one of your biggest assets, because when you talk about having those pains, when you talk about having those frustrations, it really allows people to understand that you were just like them and now you've achieved XYZ result. And if you being, you know, when you appear just like them beforehand is what makes them want to follow you, because they want to, again, attain that same result. So it's extremely powerful. I recommend students to really get clear on their story, you know, drill it in, and then kind of, you know, play it up as much as you can. Webinars, videos, emails, podcasts, whatever medium of communication you're going ahead and leveraging, as often as you can, include your story, elements of your story, elements of that backstory to create relatability.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Now, you mentioned earlier as well, which ties in, which is, you know, sort of the kryptonite and polarizing that audience and really kind of standing against something. It'd be great to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so there's two different, so I'll talk about polarization first, and polarization is something that a lot of people shy away from because they want everyone to like them. But if you look at a lot of people who have massive audiences, you first have to look at what's the most scarce commodity in the marketplace today. And without a shadow of a doubt, it's not money, it's not time, it's attention. So if you can get someone's attention, you can keep their attention, you can then have the ability to offer them a product or a service. Then once you offer them that first product or service, you'll have more of a relationship, you can get more attention, you can sell more to that person, right? But if you can't ever get their attention in the first place, nothing's gonna happen. And in being polarizing, you tend to get more attention because people tune in to characters who are polarizing. So, you know, in layman's terms, being polarizing is when some people love you and some people hate you, but there's not that in between that kind of think, oh, you know, Misha's all right. He's not that good, right? He's not anything special or whatever. You kind of want to create more of a divide because you want that certain group of people to hate you, and you want that certain group of people to love you, because when that group of people love you, those are the people who will buy from you over and over and over again. And like you mentioned a moment ago, kind of the fastest way to get there is you define clearly what you stand for, and you define clearly what you stand against, and then you take a stance on both of those topics, and you really, in your marketing, you know, on your webinars and your videos and your emails, all of it, clearly define what you stand against, and be very open in what you stand against, and be very open in, you know, scorning bad behaviors that you stand against, and so on and so forth. And in doing so, what happens is simultaneously you repel people who you don't want to work with. So the things you stand against should be traits of people who you don't necessarily want to work with. So for me, it's get rich quick, you know, wanting the system to do all the work for you, blaming the system for lack of results. All of those are things that a customer, I don't want to deal with that customer, right? So in me openly scorning those bad behaviors, I repel those people, and I simultaneously become magnetically attractive to the people on the other end of the spectrum who feel the same way, right? Because they understand that I feel the same way. There's that, you know, and so it's a bond created with the person who I actually do want to work with.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. When you're polarizing, whether people love you or people hate you, they continue to tune in. And so people, I think, are a little bit afraid of being polarizing because they think they're going to offend some people and they're going to push people away. And the truth is, you might offend some people, you might push some people away, but if you do it correctly, you'll push away people who don't, you don't want to work with in the first place. And then what's really ironic is those people will continue to listen and tune in, but just not buy and not necessarily take the action steps that you don't want them to take because you don't want to work with them. So your audience continues to grow based on that polarizing factor.
That's awesome, man. I mean, I love, you mentioned earlier, right? Like people are watching 4 to 6 hours of television a day, which is nothing other than like the perpetual either entertainment or outrage machine.
Exactly.
Right? It's like whatever we're doing, we're just elevating emotion here, which is what we're trying to accomplish as marketers.
Exactly.
So that's great. Now, I think really important though is the moral code, and you spoke to that on stage, and I think that's a really, of course, key piece of this.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of perfect that you brought it up now because the moral code and polarization is pretty tightly kind of knit. It's essentially your moral code is just this body of behaviors that you stand for and that you have to follow no matter what the situation is, no matter what the circumstance, no matter what the harm to your character might be. Maybe you could make an extra sale if you go against your moral code, but you don't because you live by your moral code. And really, again, in today's marketplace and in today's world, unfortunately, not many people have moral codes. And if they do, they can be found breaking it very, very, very regularly. And so just in you actually having a moral code, just in you actually having something that you live by, a code of behaviors, a code of conduct, a code of standards that you live by and hold yourself accountable to, it makes you attractive, it makes you stand out, it makes you stand out as someone different and kind of a cut above the rest of the people just because you actually have that code of behaviors and the code of conduct that you follow. And a kind of common misconception is that in having your moral code, it means that you have to do everything just right. It means that you have to be perfect all the time. It means that you have to be the goody two-shoes, if you will, right? And it's really not that. It's really about you having the power to define what standards you want to actually live your life by and then simply living your life by those standards. So the example I always give is, have you watched Californication, show Californication at all?
I've seen a couple episodes, yeah.
All right, so Hank Moody, by no stretch of the imagination, was a goody two-shoes, right? He'd go out, he'd drink too much, he'd get into all kinds of trouble, he'd do drugs, all those things. But part of his moral code was that when he was with Karen, the love of his life, he would never cheat on Karen, no matter what, right? No matter what the situation, no matter what circumstance he was in, he would never cheat on Karen. And so it's an example of someone who, by no stretch of the imagination, is the goody two-shoes, yet still has this code of behavior and this code of conduct that he follows, which again differentiates himself from the people who don't have that code, who don't have those standards that they kind of hold themselves accountable to. But yeah, and it should also, I'll close with this, just like with polarization in repelling your nightmare customers and attracting your perfect customers, your moral code and your elements of your moral code should do the same thing. So if your moral code is that you don't stand for, get rich quick, and you're not, someone who sells get rich quick, that will repel a nightmare customer that you don't want to work with if you don't want to work with those people, right? If your moral code is that you always invest in yourself and you're always constantly learning, you're practicing the slight edge, that will attract the person who's doing the same thing, who thinks the same way, right? And so you really need to get clear firstly on who you want to attract. The attractive character is powerful, but you need to know who you actually want to attract. Then you build out the different elements of the attractive character based on wanting to attract that perfect person who you actually want to serve in your marketing. So.
Absolutely, man.
Yeah.
That's great. And what I really appreciate too is, as you mentioned, when you're thinking about the character that you can adopt, literally anyone can start as the reporter or the evangelist. There's zero physical, mental, or otherwise physiological barrier to entry. You can be a reporter. You can start doing that today. So I think that's a really great tip for the folks that are watching.
I think one thing that holds people back is oftentimes they'll think, God, I can't necessarily get that person to get on an interview with me. I'm a nobody if they're brand new and first getting started. And the biggest thing that they have to understand is that whenever you're interviewing someone else, you're positioning that other person in a powerful way. You're positioning them as the leader, you're positioning them as the authority. And so what you'll find is that oftentimes multiple seven-figure earners, they're totally fine with hopping on an interview with you for an hour because it's positioning them in the marketplace. And oftentimes you can actually even tap into their audience with that medium. So if you host a really awesome interview and ask really engaging questions and do your research on that person and get, a little bit more intel versus just asking how do you get traffic? How do you, if you actually ask them about where they came from, I heard this in your story, and make it an engaging interview. Oftentimes what I've done in the past is that I'll then take those interviews and I'll mail them out to my list, and I'll mail a link out to that person's website who interviewed me, right? So, people love being interviewed. It positions them correctly, and oftentimes you can actually get exposure and get traffic to your website based on that. So
definitely. And most folks that you would see like on stage are actually genuinely nice people.
Yeah.
And if they have time, they would absolutely love to fit it in their schedule. So.
Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome, man.
So.
Well, cool. I have one final question for you, which is, of course, next year is No Excuses 10.
Yep.
So pretty big deal, right?
Yep.
And so do you have any words of encouragement if someone's at home right now, they're watching, they're like, oh man, should I go? Should I like make the investment and go to No Excuses 10? What do you have to say?
Well, I'll tell a little story actually. Way back when I was first getting started, it was right before No Excuses Summit 5, a couple months before No Excuses Summit 5. And that was, I'm not going to go into my backstory too much, but I was not in a good place financially. I was strapped for cash. I was in debt. I didn't really have anything. And I ended up hopping on a webinar with Fernie actually. And Fernie kind of, pitched No Excuses Summit. And at the end, I was in a space where, no, I can't spend anymore. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to go. I'm not going to, take the leap. And Fernie said something that I remember to this day. And he said, you're not going to come to the event because you're not being successful. You're not seeing success in your business yet. But the only reason you're not seeing success in your business is because you're not actually getting to the event. And he said, if you keep, engaging in that cycle, nothing's going to happen. You're never going to break through. And I was kind of like, crap, he got me. So I bought a ticket on that webinar. Again, last dollars, literally. Had to wait a couple weeks to actually buy a ticket, to actually get out here, the plane ticket. I bought a one-way ticket to Las Vegas, showed up, had, barely enough to buy one meal per day at the all-you-can-eat buffet in Vegas. I forget where it was that year, NES 5. But that was the event that really kind of turned it all around for me. That was the event where I kind of got, events have so many different powerful, you learn the tactics, you learn the skill sets, you create relationships. For me, that event really gave me internal breakthroughs where I realized that I could do it. Oftentimes when you're at home, unfortunately, you're the only person stupid enough to try to build an online business, right? And your family's telling you to stop, your peers kind of laughing at you, and you're kind of looked at as the guy dumb enough to have a dream to start an online business. And when you get around these events, everyone's on a common mission, everyone's trying to achieve the same goal. For me, it really allowed me to realize that, like you said, these speakers are good people. They're people at the end of the day. They're, flesh and blood. If they can do it, you can too, if you learn skill sets. And it allowed me to shift the paradigm where before the event, I was thinking, they can do it, but I can't. And after the event, I was thinking, they can do it, and so I can do it too, which was extremely powerful. And one of the best decisions I ever made, getting to No Excuses Summit 5, turned it all around, and now a few short years later, business is seeing success, and we're cranking and rock and rolling and all that stuff. So
massive success.
I would say, whatever the excuse is, whatever the objection is, whatever the reason is that you're not going to come, do yourself a favor and find a way to get here. Because if you're resourceful, you can find a way, and if you find a way, it can change your life. So it's worth a shot at least. But,
awesome, man.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Appreciate you. Thank you, sir.
Awesome, dude.
Awesome.